Hi, welcome to the Mason Duchatschek Show. I created it as a place where you can go to get access to expert ideas, strategies, and tools that can make you exponentially more valuable, if not indispensable, to the company you work for. And if you own a business, I want to help you make it much more profitable in the meantime and more valuable for down the road so you can attract more offers and bigger offers faster if you ever decide to sell it. My favorite topics are obviously related to business, people, and the leaders who inspire them, and I'm glad you're here. My guest today is Dale Furtwengler. He's the author of one of my favorite books, Pricing for Profit, and several others. So, Dale, before we begin, people have a frame of reference about where you're coming from. What should people know about you and the impact of the work you do?
Okay, well, my mission is to help my clients achieve the results that they want, have their dreams come true. And I do that by helping them with pricing and attracting the customers they desire and the profits they deserve.
Cool. With As it relates to understanding value beyond cost, in pricing for profit, you mentioned that price should reflect value, not just cost. How can business owners effectively communicate their product's value to justify higher prices?
Well, it depends on whether you're selling business to business or business to consumer. There are little different strategies for each. So, in the business to business environment, one of the things that you want to do, because most prices are negotiated in business to business, so you want to be able to lead the prospect through a calculation of value so that they are part of that calculation determining that value because then they believe it. So, to give you a brief example from a personal experience, I had a prospect who was a bank subsidiary and they liked the training program that I was promoting, but they said they didn't think they were ready because they had a morale problem. So I said, well, okay, if you've got a morale problem, I'm assuming you've got an absenteeism problem. He said, oh, yeah. I said, so how's the work getting done? He said, well, we've got people working overtime. How much are you spending for that? He looked, 85,000 a year. I said, using any temporary help? Yeah. How much are you spending for that? 40,000 a year. So when we solve your morale problem, we're going to save you $125,000 a year. He said, I never looked at it that way. So you see, when they're involved in the calculation, they trust the numbers. And then your price in relation to that makes a lot more sense to them because they can
Cool.
see that they're getting more than what they're paying for.
Could you
Okay.
give me maybe an example in a business to business environment?
Well, in that particular case, I was selling from my business to uh, a bank subsidiary. But
Gotcha.
any consulting, any service industry, if you're selling products from one business to another, what's that product going to do for your business? How's it going to streamline your processes? What does that mean for your bottom line? So it always comes back to that element. What's it
Could you
going to
give me
do?
an example in business to consumer?
Business to consumer can be a little different. Um, and one of the simplest ways to determine what price to charge is what I call relational pricing. So you look at non competing industries and the products they're offering and see how your product relates to that. So the numbers I'm going to use now are from long, long ago. So the numbers themselves aren't accurate, but the relationship is. So when I did this research originally, if I wanted a sweater, I could get one at Walmart for $10. Target would have been 12 or 13. Macy's, Penny's would have been 30 to 40. Macy's would have been 60 to 80. Nordstrom's would have been 120 to 140. So those are the price differentials. So assume for a moment that I wanted to be a chocolatier and I wanted to provide a good quality, affordable uh, chocolate to the market. Well, if I looked at those five, I'd say that's probably going to be more like pennies. So, with that knowledge that if that's the market I'm going to be targeting, then I can look at the least profitable or least pricey chocolate and then know that I could get probably 3 to 4 times that
Okay.
because that's what Penny gets over Walmart.
Do you have any research or even gut instincts based on your experience that would give you an idea what percentage of a typical, if there is such a thing, a typical market has competition in the super high level, the super low level, each of the different tiers? What percentage of companies typically fall into those? Because I'm a huge fan of Tim Ferriss in his book 4 Hour Work Week, and he talks about if what you're doing isn't working, do the opposite. And he also talks about setting super high standards. He says it's easier to walk into a bar if you're trying to meet members of the opposite sex and you walk into a bar and there's one perfect 10. He said there's less competition for the one perfect 10 because there's less people that believe that they can compete for that. And it's much harder to engage and interact with someone who's a 7, 8, or 9. And, and I'm just wondering if I'm just curious what's the term I want to use? If you have any idea what percentage of companies go after the super high end versus the super low end and where the ones in the middle fall in. Do you have any research or experience on that?
No, I really don't. I don't have anything that would indicate what percentage of companies go after that. The companies that employ a premium price strategy are by far a much smaller percentage, regardless of industry, than the ones that are trying to compete on price. It's sad, but that's true. And, a lot of that comes from the fact that I think that a lot of businesses, a lot of business owners think that price is the number one factor in the buying decision, and that's simply not true. J. Conrad Levinson, in his original version of guerrilla marketing, said that his firm had surveyed 10,000 consumers, and only 14% of them said that price was the number one factor in the buying decision. That means that 86%, a huge majority, are placing something, some aspect of value greater than that, whether it's product quality, timeliness, responsiveness, friendliness, the integrity of the salesperson, the knowledge, or whatever they place value on those things. In fact, according to his book, for value buyers, price ranked ninth on the list of factors in the buying decision.
It's. I was watching a, a video on the internet about Russell Brunson, and he was talking about how one of his mentors, and I can't remember which one it was, that he was talking about, said that there's no strategic advantage to being the second lowest price. Yet so many companies rush to the bottom to compete on price, and that's why I was curious about how much competition there was at the highest end. Because I mean, this is why this topic of pricing fascinates me, because there's so much more competition for the low end on the price schedule in a lot of industries,
Mm-hmm.
and there's no strategic advantage to being the second lowest price. Yet everyone tries to go that direction. And one of the things that I like about you is you encourage people not to do that, and you tell them why, and you give them specific steps on how they can get better. That's why I loved your book. I read it cover to cover.
Oh, great, great. Yeah, the what I talk about, as you well know from having read the book, is that a lot of companies will assume this is a graph, okay, and they'll look at the price elasticity as a way of determining that. And so the curve price elasticity goes vertical for a while, then it curves and it levels out down here. And a lot of companies are looking at this curved area to determine where they can optimize their both the revenues and the profitability of their offerings. And what I'm suggesting to them is that what you want to do is be on the vertical here where price doesn't matter, where
Yes,
there is no competition, because you're offering such a distinct offering that nobody else is providing it. You're the only source for that. And that value that are going to be paying a very high premium to get it. Now, they're still getting more than what they're paying for, because that's a must.
sure.
Otherwise, they're not going to buy. They're not going to part with their money. But bidding on that vertical part, then there really isn't any competition.
So speaking of mistakes, what are some of the most common pricing mistakes you see businesses make, and how can they avoid them to maintain profitability?
Yeah, I've got a PDF that has 10 common pricing errors on it. I'd be happy to share with your audience. But
Please.
one of the biggest is failing to raise prices every year. And people are business owners are afraid of losing customers in that process. But the reality is that if you raise prices 3 to 5% a year, that if you lose any customers at all, it's going to be the price buyers, the least loyal, most difficult to please people on the earth. And these are ones you'd be better off without. And they're going to be replaced by people who now see that your price is congruent with the value claims that you make, and they're more likely to buy. So you're going to be replacing those with customers who really value what you have to offer, and in their minds, your price reflects that value. Okay, so yeah, that's a potential problem. Now, the flip side of that coin, or the icing on the cake, really, if you will, is that business owners that raise their price 3 to 5% a year end up improving their purchasing power year in and year out, because in the vast majority of years here in the US, the inflation rate's 2%. So at 3 to 5, you're gaining purchasing power, real purchasing power over and above inflation with that. So, raising prices every year is an essential element.
It's That's one of those things that you and I've talked about before, and I'm glad you brought it up today, is because I feel like there's a sense in the part of business owners and sales managers who are making decisions regarding pricing to be hesitant to do that because they think they'll alienate a customer, or a customer will start looking somewhere else for something different. And unless you're in a commodity business, which, I mean, I recognize some people are, but unless you're in a commodity business and you haven't done a great job of differentiating the value of what you have to offer, it's how do I phrase this? It's a hassle for them to go out and, oh, let's go take a look at all the new bids, and let's go take a look at all the different options, and let's compare pricing. And people are busy anyway. So for an extra 2% or whatever, they're like, hey, if I'm getting value that's greatly in excess of what I'm being charged by this vendor, then why would I try fixing something that isn't broken? And everyone wins. They stay happy. They don't go on any wild goose chases. And for the reasons you stated, that's a very good point, Dale. I'm glad you made that.
Well, yeah, and you're absolutely right. And that thought process that you just described is one that I think occurs more subconsciously than consciously. But that's the mental process that they go through. You know, when they start thinking about all the things they'd have to do to change vendors for 3 to 5%, it's not going to happen. Now, if a company waits 4 or 5 years and they got to do a double-digit increase, they're forcing their customers to go shop. That's
Sure.
sad. It could be avoided. It's easily avoided.
So let's talk a little bit about differentiating. How can companies set themselves apart from competitors in a way that allows them to charge premium prices? Are there some strategies that you've seen work consistently across different industries, or what's your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, there are a number of ways to do that. One is to take a look at your offerings and why you created them. Because typically the reason that someone goes into business is that they see that there's something missing in the marketplace, something that the customers aren't happy with, and they feel like they can fill that gap and take away that nuisance factor, if you will. So if you're doing that, and it can be a little nuisance, can have a big impact on the customer satisfaction. So if you're identifying things that are nuisances for people in the market that you want to serve, and you eliminate them, you're automatically going to differentiate yourself in a way that makes sense. Now, then you have to be able to communicate that. So that shows up as a clear brand promise, which for small businesses is a tagline. So what they're going to do in that tagline, and few taglines actually do this, is communicate succinctly what that result is going to be that customer is going to get. And in doing so, now they see that. Another factor that helps is if they have a psychographic profile of the ideal customer. So a profile based on values, behaviors, and characteristics. And when they communicate that along with that result in their marketing message, what happens is they attract people who value that and they repel the ones that don't.
Can you give me an example?
Yes. One of the programs I have is a leadership program. And I identify that there are three types of managers. There are autocrats who view employees as automatons. So they key in the instructions, flip a switch, and they better darn well do what they're told. There are paternalists who feel a moral responsibility to not necessarily hire the top tier people and consequently don't expect a lot of them. And then there are engagement managers, people who like to engage employees in identifying new opportunities, streamlining processes, and solving problems. Well, my program is designed for the third group. So when I approached the market and said, if you're the kind of manager that likes to engage your employees, blah, 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 and you want results like this, give me a call. Well, I got a lot fewer calls, but the sale was virtually made when I got the call because they saw themselves in that leadership style, knew it worked for them. I didn't have to educate them on it. I didn't have to convince them it was going to work. They just weren't getting the magnitude of results that I'd gotten. And so that really boosts the differentiation. Then it clearly communicates and it attracts people who share the same values.
And for that matter, it repels the ones you don't want and
Yes.
don't. And that's a cost savings to your business as well.
Oh, absolutely. You spend a lot less time and, more importantly, energy. Think of all the energy that gets drained from us when we get rejection after rejection after rejection, and we can't figure out why nobody's buying what we're selling. And it's because we're talking to people who really don't value the same things we value.
It's funny you talk about that, about you repelling the people that you don't want. And that I remember when I was on the programs committee in the Human Resource Management Association of St. Louis before I became president there. There was we had a guest speaker, and he was the owner of one of the top 5 online recruiting companies in the country. And and he asked the audience, he was talking about recruiting. He asked the audience, he said, what's the worst thing that can happen if you put an ad for a job opening in the newspaper? Because that's how people did it then.
Mm-hmm.
And the consensus was nobody responds. He was saying, no, that's the second worst thing that can happen. The worst thing that can happen is you get a whole bunch of responses from people who aren't qualified for the job. So not only did you lose your money putting the job ad out, but you had to get no good quality applicants. But in this case, you also waste a whole bunch of time, energy, and resources on top of that to come up with the same outcome, which is you still don't have any good applicants. So there's value there too. Since you mentioned the psychographics, what role does psychology play in pricing strategies? Are there some specific psychological pricing techniques that you recommend to business owners?
Yes, definitely. Psychology is involved in everything, right? So no matter what we're doing, there's some psychological aspect to it. But in particular, here in the pricing arena, uh, part of the psychology is that we learn at a very early age that there's a direct relationship between price and value. And somehow, when we become business owners, we lose sight of that. And so, one of the things is reminding ourselves of that so that we're keeping in mind that the value that we're touting and the price that we're charging are congruent so that the buyer actually trusts that. If you get claims of very high value and a low price, especially if it's lower than your competitors, they're going to be confused. Because if you're really this good, then why aren't you charging this? And when buyers get confused, they always revert to price.
And there's that sense of unnecessary skepticism. It's like, well, that sounds too good to be true. Where's the what's the catch? And I don't want to look foolish in front of my peers or my employees or anybody for that matter, family for that matter. I don't want to get burned here. So you're exactly right about that. I agree.
Yeah, and the psychographic profile is another psychological element of that. And with the psychographic profile, you get a clearer understanding of who your ideal customer is. And to demonstrate the difference between psychographics and demographics, so let's use this example. Mason, let's assume that you own a Mercedes dealership and you know all of your customers have six-figure incomes and they live in certain zip codes, right? Those are the demographics and they're accurate. But what they don't explain is why there are people in those zip codes with six-figure incomes who are driving Hummers, Lexus, BMWs, Audis, and so on, all the other luxury cars. Until we get to that, we really don't know how to attract the people who value the same thing we do and repel those that don't. So yes, there's a lot of psychology involved.
Can you expound a little bit on your psychographic profile a little bit more? Can you go into a little more detail on that? Because I think we're skimming the surface, and I think that there's more I want to know about it. And I mean, how do you go? What are some of the steps that you go about in creating one?
And the way I work with clients on that, on creating a psychographic profile for them, is I go through three different perspectives and then look at the commonality. So the first perspective, yeah, I asked the client, why did you create the offering that you did? What did you see that was missing in the marketplace that you're filling that gap? Because that tells me what they value. Then I asked them to tell me about the customer that they enjoy working with the most. What makes them so much fun to work with? And then I ask them, who's the most profitable customer you have? And what is it that they see in your offerings that allows them to pay a premium price to get it? And interestingly, the most profitable and most enjoyable are the same people. Uh, but we take the answers to those and we triangulate them, and typically we come up with 3 to 5, more often than not 4 different values, behaviors, or characteristics that are related to both the seller, the business owner, and their ideal customer. And then we communicate that both in the marketing materials and I use it in the sales call. So to give you an example, if I may use my own
Please,
psychographic profile, just so people get a
please
sense
do.
of what it looks like. My ideal customer, number one, is customer centric. And you'll notice I define all these terms, okay? They like to exceed customer expectations. They are dynamic. They prefer to initiate change rather than respond to it. They're uh, results oriented. They like to outperform their competitors, and they're value oriented. They know they provide great value, but often don't feel like they're getting compensated well for that. So when those 4 exist, and I'm sitting in a sales call with a prospect, number one, I will use that in my marketing to attract them. But then in the sales call, what I'll do is I'll say, where my clients and I enjoy the greatest success is when they possess these qualities. And I'll outline them just as I did a moment ago. Interestingly, in about 20% of the cases, they'll ask, do I qualify? So you talk
Interesting.
about changing the dynamic, the psychology of the sales call. That's a huge turnaround because they're asking if they qualify. And interestingly, in that 20%, there's typically a concern that I have. And in that concern, it opens a door for the discussion of that concern. So I'll say to them, I know logically this makes sense to you, but I'm going to be asking you to do this, and I'm afraid that it's so far outside your comfort zone, you're not going to be able to do it. And if that's the case, we ought not to move forward. And so that is a critical element in that decision making process. But even the other 80% who don't ask at that point realize this is not going to be a unilateral decision. We are going to decide jointly whether or not we're going to move forward. And that takes it out of the customer vendor realm into the peer partner realm so that we have a good foundation for a partnership working toward a common goal going forward.
And that's a cool thing too, because they're evaluating like, wow, this guy practices what he preaches. And they're probably also having an internal dialogue saying, wow, I wish my sales representatives were having these kind of interactions with our ideal customers. And when you practice what you preach, that has to mean everything to them, and solve a whole bunch of unnecessary delay problems as it relates to getting new customers, I'd have to imagine.
Oh, it does. And, a benefit that I didn't anticipate, uh, is a woman that I see occasionally at networking events that at one point was a prospect. And we had that discussion about, I'm concerned that you're not going to be able to do this. And she agreed that it was going to be too difficult for her to do. This is the way she introduces me when we see one another, because she's very social, and so she's normally got several people around her. She'll say, "Hey, let me introduce you to Dale. If you haven't met Dale before, you need to talk to him because he's going to tell you the God's honest truth." She said, "He talked to me about his services and showed me that it wasn't the right fit for me. So if you want somebody that's going to tell you the truth, you need to talk to Dale." Well,
That's fair.
I can't buy publicity like that, right? I mean, I don't have enough money in the world for that. Um, so, you're not only helping that person, but you're gaining their trust, their confidence, and their willingness to tout you for what you do and who you are.
Let's talk a little bit about perceived value and customer loyalty. How does pricing affect customer loyalty and perception of brand quality, in your opinion?
I think the pricing really doesn't matter. When you have that alignment of values between the business and the customer, they're getting what they want, and they're getting it consistently, and they're happy with the result they're getting. The price really doesn't matter. There was a point of time in my consulting work where I was doing fractional CFO work, and I still do it occasionally, but I don't promote it like I do the business development pricing stuff that I do now. Um, but I would go into my clients every year, so I'm walking the talk, and say, I haven't raised my fees in a while. I'd like to discuss my fees. And the response I would get from them is, "There's nothing to discuss. What do you want?" Why do they do that? Because they've been getting more than what they're paying for. And as long as your customers have been getting more than they're paying for, as long as your quality and your service and your responsiveness and your genuine care and concern for their welfare are obvious to them and consistently obvious to them, that price doesn't matter.
It's, and I guess there was a reason why I asked that question, and I'm curious what your take is on it. Like, I've had internet service where I live, and I get this price of X dollars a month, and it's fine. It does what I need it to do. And then
Mhm.
after 12 months, it skyrockets to, well, I wouldn't say double, but 50% more at least. It's
Mhm.
crazy. And I'm a loyal customer.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden they jack up my prices. And I was happy with it at the price before, but it's not worth 50% more when there's other options out there that aren't as much that I could easily switch. Well, easily the cost of change, I guess. So it's relatively easy to switch to. But if I like them and I'm like, your service is fine, I would love to stay with you, but I'm not going to do it at this price.
Mhm.
And you would think they would just say, well, hey, we'll continue. I can't tell you how many times I've been through this, whether it's been with internet service, whether it's been trash service, that they have to lose me as a customer when I
Mhm.
tell them in advance what's going to happen. And then they come back and they say, well, we have this new thing, there's new incentive to get customers. Like, it's like loyal. It's like there's loyalty is non-existent to an existing customer. They
Mhm.
raise our prices and I get treated worse than a potential customer. Now,
Yes.
what's your take on that? What are the teachable moments out of there, out of that scenario? Because it repeats itself.
Yeah, it does. And to me, like you, I think it's folly. It's sheer folly. Number one, it's easier to retain a customer and more profitable. Uh, Part of the problem is uh, that the magnitude of the increase. If that had been a 3% or 5% increase, you just said, yeah, okay, no big deal. But you're getting hit with 50%? No, that's ridiculous. And they're
That's what I told them.
and more often than not, they're not going to pick up enough new customers at that higher price to offset the loss of your other customers. So, it's a strategy that gets employed a lot, especially in the tech field. So, the internet services, the phone services, and things like that. It's crazy to me that I pay more for my phone plan with my wife and I being the only ones on the phone than people with a brand new phone and a four person plan. It just doesn't make sense. And yet companies do it and they remain profitable, but I think in those cases they remain profitable despite themselves rather than uh, as a result of a good business strategy.
Because I have fired those companies and gone through the hassle of changing as a matter of principle. And I
Hmm.
literally tell them, like, I want to remain a customer. I am happy to remain a customer. You are going to make a decision that's going to
Right,
make me not a customer.
right,
And then your company is going to waste your time
yeah,
calling me, emailing me, mailing me stuff, trying to get me back. And I'm telling you, you can save all that time and all that money by just doing the right thing right now.
right,
And they don't do it.
yeah.
So
Well, part of the problem there is when we complain, we're complaining to people who have no ability to make a decision.
oh, I make no mistake. I always ask, can you put me in touch with someone who can make a decision?
Oh,
I do know that part. I do that, but
yeah,
it's like they're anyway. I'm curious. I'm venting there.
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about pricing strategy for new products. When introducing a new product, what factors should business owners consider in setting an initial price, and how do you test whether it's too high, too low, or just right?
Yeah, that's a lot more challenging than other pricing issues. But one of the things that we can look at is the history of other initial offerings, uh, new product launches, and see what they did there and get a sense from that. I typically look at what happened when VHS became popular, then it switched to DVD and then to Blu-ray or, uh, the iPhones, the
Sure.
smartphones, everything. So I don't know if this is a magical number or not, but in each of those cases, like the VHS, DVD, and the Blu-ray, typically those players, when they initially came out, were around $1,200 for the earliest version. Apple's iPhone, if I remember correctly, was about $1,200. So I don't know if there's something magical about that number or not. But one of the things that I see, one of the mistakes I see that get made after that initial price is set, is that companies will try to keep competitors out of the marketplace, and they'll reduce the price too early in the process and actually hurt themselves uh, from a profitability standpoint. And they're really not preventing or not retaining market share that they think they might be losing because the other competitors aren't quite there yet anyway.
Well, let's talk, shift gears just a little bit. Um, I'm fascinated by the idea of the premium pricing, and let's just say in business to business markets. What strategies do you recommend for business to business operations that are looking to shift from competing on price like they may have in the past to offering premium price strategies or solutions?
Yeah, one of the things is getting, if they aren't able to calculate the value themselves, finding somebody that can help them calculate the value. So I come from a CPA background. We're taught how to quantify things, and very few business owners come from that background. So they're not being taught how to do that. And unfortunately, even a lot of CPAs aren't good at calculating value. They're better at calculating cost than value. But so trying to find somebody that has that value orientation, that mindset, and getting them to help you see that value. You can also do that. It just brought to mind something I did a number of years ago. Uh, I did a little program for a group of business people, and they were tables of 8. And I gave each of them 30 seconds to tell the rest of the group at their table what they did for a customer that they didn't charge for. And then
Interesting.
I gave the rest of the people at the table 2 minutes to tell that person what value they saw in it.
That's an excellent point. So as an exercise, that's a diamond right there. So one of the suggestions you're making is to surround yourself with a group of people and say, what is it that our company provides for you that we don't charge for, and what's the value associated with that?
Uh-huh.
That's gold.
Yeah. And, when I brought them all back together and asked them what they'd learned, they said we had no idea how much value we were giving away. And, what prompted that presentation was that I had so many clients when I would talk to them and they'd say they were doing something for their customer. And I'd say, well, what do you charge for that? And they'd say, oh, I don't. It only takes me 15 minutes. And my response would be, it takes you 15 minutes. I could spend 4 hours and not produce a result that good. So
That's
it's
a
not
very valid
the
point.
amount of time that it takes you to do it, it's the amount of time it would have taken me to do it and what result I would have gotten.
That's awesome. So I'll tell you what, start wrapping up. One question I definitely want to ask is avoiding price wars. Price wars can be devastating for profitability. What strategies can help companies avoid even getting drawn into a price war?
Mm-hmm. Get on the vertical of the price elasticity curve.
Okay,
Distinguish yourselves in a way that there's nobody else doing that, and it has value to the customer. They don't care about price, and you don't have to worry about trying to match somebody else's price.
I was almost ready to anticipate your answer and say discipline. Just don't do it. But your answer is more scholastic than mine. Don't do it. Don't get sucked into it. But so, first of all, Dale, I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your insights. I appreciate your wisdom. If people want to know more about you, the things that you do, the things that your business does, how do they get a hold of you? Where do they learn more about you?
Well, they can learn more at my website, which is cuttingedge-business.com. And it talks about the various programs I have available and services I have available. There are video tips there. I write a weekly blog, so they can subscribe to that and get tips on pricing and marketing and branding, sales, all of that there on a weekly basis, delivered directly to their inbox. They can email me at dale@furtwengler.com. That's DALE at FURTWENGLER.com. Or they can call me at 314-707-3771.
Dale, thank you. And I'm gonna be bold, and I'm gonna suggest to people they get your book Pricing for Profit. I loved it. I can't even count how many business books I've read. It is a very unique book. It is in a class by itself. And I'm not just saying that because you're here. I would say that to people. I would talk behind your back and say the same things, but it's really a good book with lots of actionable, practical ideas that can be implemented and executed right away to make businesses better. I thought it was a masterpiece and I really liked it. And it's a real privilege to have you on today. And I'm glad we got the chance to visit and that other people got to listen in. Thanks, Dale.
Well, thank you for those encouraging words and for having me on your program.
It's been a pleasure. Have a great day.
Thanks. You too.